The pick that has raised the most eyebrows is the creation of the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, which is led by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. I do hope that Vivek and Elon bring something interesting to the mix. But introducing this organization, I think it'll really keep the US federal government on its toes. In key cosmopolitan suburbs like Kolaba, they couldn't even break 44% voter turnout. It was one of the lowest. I find this so disappointing because these areas, South Bombay and even other cosmopolitan areas such as Bandra West, which also had very low voter turnout, are often the most vocal about how the country is going to the dogs, or is becoming fascist, or is a dictatorship. And the grand irony, they themselves are not exercising their privilege of voting to make a difference. Hello everyone, and welcome to The Overcorrection. There have been some fascinating developments in the world of politics and economics, both in India and abroad. We saw Donald Trump get a historic comeback mandate in the US 2024 presidential elections, and then he's gone on to make a lot of news for his cabinet picks, which have, I think, got the establishment bureaucracy in the US extremely worried. We saw him do his marquee act, which was to launch a new organization called the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, which will be run by none other than Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, right? Shows that meme culture in the US is well and truly alive. Now, closer to our shores, we are all waiting in bated breath for the results of the Maharashtra and Jharkhand state assembly elections, or Vidhan Sabha elections. And lastly is the shocking SEC indictment of Gautam Adani amongst 7 other people in the US for bribery charges. So all this and more on this week's episode. I'm your host, Purjit Gautam, and this is What's Left of Center. So diving into our first story, Donald Trump is back. He's a deeply controversial, convicted felon who has staged an epic comeback of sorts that has placed him in the most powerful office in the world. He's brash, lacks composure, and still showcases a very juvenile understanding of political affairs and diplomacy. And he's clearly in repay favors mode as he pads his cabinet with Trump loyalists. Amongst a string of unconventional and largely anti-establishment picks, perhaps the pick that has raised the most eyebrows is the creation of the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, which is led by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. Now, I have a lot of thoughts about this organization, both good and bad, but it is clearly a department that has set the cat amongst the bureaucratic pigeons, as people are really worried for the future of their jobs. And, at some level, I see the logic in the creation of this department. In advanced countries, the over-bureaucratization often leads to a tremendous amount of inertia, inefficiency, and a lack of accountability. So there's little incentive for these organizations to improve and grow, and the taxpayers end up paying a brunt of the price in the form of poor infrastructure, minimal development, and very, very high taxation at the same rate, right? So I saw this level of inefficiency, frankly, when I was exploring the UN system as a career at the time. So it's a system that is set up with such a noble cause, right, as is the federal government. But it's basically a test case of over-bureaucracy where entire jobs and careers have been made on establishing process, monitoring, and evaluation, and then evaluating whether an organization is doing its evaluation correct. So all of these organizations where little actual work gets done. And the elite in these organizations live world-class lives, fly first class, and their goal is to actually help the poor and disadvantaged. So to launch something like this in the US makes sense. There is a bloat and a lack of accounting, especially with organizations like the Pentagon, who have apparently failed multiple audits, including a recent audit of a staggering multi-billion-dollar sum. Now, I do hope that Vivek and Elon bring something interesting to the mix. But introducing this organization, I think it'll really keep the US federal government on its toes. And it seems like they're planning on introducing a lot of Javier Milei-style policies from Argentina. So I think people should be prepared to see a lot of ruffled feathers, including him just afueraing a bunch of organizations, which is his favorite word for getting rid of organizations that don't do anything in the Argentinian government. Now, my biggest critique of this effort is that Elon still operates extensively as a private individual with keen business interests And being this close to the federal purchasing machinery through an organization like DOGE, to me, doesn't bode well for independence, right? Or fiscal independence. But perhaps it shows all along what we've known, that the US claims to not be that corrupt, but it is indeed deeply corrupt, but just at a very high white-collar level and not on the day-to-day level like India. However, I do want to address a key point. Many people in India, when DOGE was announced, seemed to hint that India needs its own DOGE. Now, this blanket aping of the US zeitgeist is really miscalculated, because India doesn't have as much of a bloat problem as much of an understaffing issue. Yeah, that's right. India actually has a shortage of administrators across key federal government positions. So to assume that America's solutions will work for us is short-sighted and shows a lack of nuance in understanding India's unique challenges with bureaucracy. Now, closer to our shores. The Maharashtra Vidhan Sabha elections took place on November 20th. I'll be partial and cover that one because that's where I'm from. And now we know that on the 23rd of November, we'll know who the victor will be. Either the Mahayuti, which is the BJP-backed alliance, or the MVA, which is the Congress and NCP-backed alliance. Now, there has been much analysis on the intricacies of the politics of Maharashtra, including even on our podcast in past episodes. June 4th was clearly a wake-up call for the BJP in Maharashtra, and certainly they'll be hoping for a big win here as a course correction for everything they'd done wrong. The exit polls once again show that BJP's alliance is leading, but I think after June 4th, people are not willing to place any of their trust in exit polls. So I think we'll only know the truth on November 23rd evening. Now, instead of going into the election dynamics of the parties, I actually want to address something closer to my heart: voter turnout. And as with all things in life, there is good news and bad news. The good news is that the election ultimately saw the highest voter turnout in Maharashtra since the 1995 assembly elections. However, what I found particularly disappointing was that in key cosmopolitan suburbs like Kolaba, right, a prime South Bombay location, they couldn't even break 44% voter turnout. It was one of the lowest. I find this so disappointing because these areas, South Bombay and even other cosmopolitan areas such as Bandra West, which also had very low voter turnout, are often the most vocal about how the country is going to the dogs, or is becoming fascist, or is a dictatorship. And the grand irony is that they themselves are not exercising their privilege of voting to make a difference. It's all the narrative and rhetoric of a rebellion without an intent to actually go and make a change. And I really hope that this does change. But I have my doubts, because I know for some in these areas, their heart is not in India anyway. They would be more interested in the US or EU immigration reform because they see their lives outside the country, not inside the country. Now, the last story is the shocking SEC indictment of Gautam Adani and 7 others in a bribery case in the US. Prosecutors in New York have accused the Adani Group chairman, Gautam Adani, and 7 others of alleged schemes to pay over $250 million in bribes to Indian government officials, to lie to investors and to banks to raise these billions of dollars and to obstruct justice. Now, there is a lot to unpack in this, but what I found most interesting, as a lot of people are finding, is the timing of it all. I don't like to fall into the conspiracy theory traps, but Adani was one of the first to give a very emphatic congrats to President-elect Trump. And many see this SEC indictment as a bit of a last-ditch attempt of the Biden admin, in whatever powers that it has, to go after Adani. People say the Hindenburg fiasco failed to really stick, and this might be one way to get them. Now, see, Adani has gone on to represent this kind of new India's growth ambition. What it does, what maybe even China does as a state in terms of building ports and airports and bridges and roads in countries. And it's naturally the favorite punching bag of the West, as well as India's own opposition leader. And that actually brings me to my main issue in this whole thing. I'm not actually going into the case, innocent until proven guilty. But if Adani and the 7 others are guilty, then justice will finally prevail, assuming that the US's judicial process is full of integrity. But if he is found innocent and cleared of his wrongdoings, then this is just another in a long list of hit jobs against him and his organization. The most shameful part for me was our leader of the opposition, Rahul Gandhi, India's brave leader, who took the opportunity to go on a press conference and say unequivocally that Adani should be arrested. just on this US SEC indictment. This once again shows how unfit Rahul is to be the head of our country, as his knee-jerk reaction exposes an agenda behind everything. A foreign country's SEC has made an indictment, innocent until proven guilty, against one of the leading enterprises in your country, a wealth creator in your country, and you call for an immediate arrest in India. It is beyond stupid and shows a lack of nuance and understanding of how the world works. The grand irony in all of this is that the indictment against Adani lists him raising funds in the US to pay bribes to Indian officials in Congress-run states. So it's just bizarre that Rahul speaks and carries himself the way he does. I really hope that the Congress party does some serious introspection before fielding him as their face in the next Lok Sabha election. Or, who knows, knowing them, they might celebrate a fourth defeat the same way they celebrated the third one. That's all for me for today. Thank you everyone for watching The Overcorrection. I'm your host, Purijit Gautam, and this was What's Left of Center.